AEW edits out boos for Sammy Guevara and Tay Conti on AEW Rampage last week. Tony Khan talks about an upcoming bidding war for AEW talents in the near future. Braun Strowman has some interesting comments about Tony Khan that we're going to talk about. And a Ring of Honor Television Championship match has been announced for this week's episode of Dynamite. All this and more in today's AEW news. Hey guys, welcome back to Wrestling News 365. Hope everyone is doing very well. As always, there are plenty of news stories to get into in the world of All Elite Wrestling. So let's start off talking about Sammy Guevara and Tay Conti. Yes, everyone's favorite couple. Now, current AEW TNT champion Scorpio Sky continues to gather more and more likes on a post that calls out AEW for reportedly editing boos for Tay Conti and Sammy Guevara. Now, the real-life couple was involved in a segment on this week's, or last week's now, AEW Rampage to continue the ongoing feud with Dan Lambert and American Top Team. As usual, with a few exceptions, the show is taped after AEW Dynamite, and last week it was no different. Now, of course, this coming week is actually going to be live, but most weeks it's taped. Now, according to fans that were in attendance, the intended babyfaces of the segment, Sammy Guevara and Tay Conti, were loudly booed and told to shut the F up by the audience. When the show aired this week, the boos/chants were edited out of the segment. Fans took to social media with their claims about the alterations. Now, Scorpio Sky would take notice and post a picture of his own with Tay Conti holding one of Sammy Guevara's traditional cue cards he uses, but the message is photoshopped over and reads, quote, "We paid to have our boos dubbed over." Now, Conti would later respond to the message with a light-hearted reply, quote, "If I didn't hear it, it didn't happen, brother." So, I mean, this is just the continuation, I suppose, of this Sammy Guevara, Tay Conti just weirdness. Now, they get a lot of hate on social media, right? And I really don't care for the whole how their relationship came about and possible overlapping of past relationships, and Sammy Guevara previously being engaged to, I think, what was her name, Pam or something. To be honest with you guys, completely transparent, I don't really even pay attention to all that because I really don't care. I find it quite weird prying that much into people's personal lives of pro wrestlers. Like, to me, it just feels weird. It just feels really weird and really invasive, and I'm not a fan of it. If we just focus on the booking, of these two, the real life couple being presented as an on-screen couple in AEW, the booking's bad. I think that's the real reason. Yes, some of the boos might originally stem from all of that stuff in the personal life, but I think the majority of it really does stem from that in terms of the presentation of both characters on television, in terms of the way they're portrayed and their portrayals on television, whether it's Dynamite, whether it's Rampage, whether it's just on social media in general. They just come across as very aggravating, and I don't know if that's necessarily because they're super happy. I don't know if it's because they've got their backs up because they get so much of this social media hate, but it almost comes across like Edge and Lita vibes, you know what I mean? And we as humans, it's an odd reaction, but it's so true that if you've got two people like showing you how happy they are and showing you how much, I guess, in love they are and how much they don't care what people think about them and all this kind of stuff, like as a viewer, you just kind of go, oh, get off. People don't really want to see people that happy, I guess, or rubbing happiness in people's faces. You know what I mean? And they just come across as two young kids, I guess, that are just annoying. They just come across as annoying. And that's probably why, I'm sure, and some people will say, this is AEW's intention. The intention is to turn them heel. I really doubt that. I think the idea was because look at they're feuding against, right? They're feuding against Scorpio Sky and Paige Van Zandt of American Top Team, and their manager's Dan Lambert, the most hated guy in AEW, right? The guy who's anti-AEW. That's the gimmick. They're meant to be the baby faces here, but people just don't like them. And they just rub people the wrong way. So if they boo, they boo. And I think, again, I'm no hypocrite. I certainly try my best not to be. I try and call it as I see it and right down the middle. And I give the energy to WWE of, during the shows, it's one of my biggest bugbears of WWE that's come over. They used to always do it for SmackDown that was taped, but they, in the Thunderdome era programming, the pandemic era programming, they developed the technology to pipe in cheers or boos or crowd noise during live television. That's what they did in the Thunderdome to try and give it some atmosphere on what was a closed, cold set. And a lot of people, myself included, had hoped once they returned to live crowds, they would remove that, but they haven't. So now you get this really weird and just so aggravating situation where you have someone in the middle of the ring cutting a promo, and everyone, it's visible, everyone in the crowd is just sitting on their hands or not making any noise, and you hear this weird, like, dubbed in crowd noise of and sometimes it's so loud you can't even hear what the person is saying during the promo. It's just so aggravating. So when I bring that energy and say, WWE, cut that out, I can't stand it, it's the same with this taped show. If the fans are booing Sammy Guevara Tay Conti, or they're telling them to, I can understand maybe shut the F up because, look, at the end of the day, it's cable. I think John Moxley's maybe one of the only person that can get away with dropping an F-bomb. But in terms of editing out the boos, yeah, come on. This is a company that wants to be listening to their audience. Any pro wrestling company should be listening to the audience. So you can't give that energy to WWE and also be doing the same thing, in my opinion. Again, when it comes to their personal lives, I could care less. When it comes to the presentation of the characters on television, that's where I just go, they're just annoying. And I think they just come across as annoying, and I think that's the majority of the action. I think if this continues, they'll have to turn heel. They'll have to. I don't care what their plans are. They'll have to turn heel because you have to listen to the crowd. And I think that this reaction is just going to grow, in my opinion. So whether or not they do turn heel, we'll have to wait and see. I can't see it happening in this feud unless... What kind of double turn turns American top team babyface? I have no idea. I really don't. But whatever they're attempting to do, it ain't working. Now, Tony Khan has been doing what he does, and that's a lot of talking, a lot of interviews recently, and he said he expects a bidding war over top AEW stars. Now, AEW's owner, CEO, and general manager, Tony Khan, was not surprised to see Cody Rhodes return to WWE at WrestleMania 38. Rhodes and his wife, Brandi, of course, parted ways with AEW earlier this year, and he had an interview, Tony Khan, that is, with ESPN's Mark Raimondi, and he said, quote, "He wasn't going to be here, and based on the conversations we were having, he never outright told me, but it was obvious that was what was happening." Now, Tony Khan said his feelings about Cody Rhodes have not changed. Not that Cody Rhodes is officially back, now that Cody Rhodes is back in WWE. Khan was reluctant to discuss how he felt seeing one of AEW's founding executive vice presidents on AEW programming. He said, quote, not anything I want to comment on. Like I've said, I appreciate the things Cody and his wife Brandi Rhodes did in AEW, and I saw Cody show up in WWE. Like I said before, he showed up there. It's all still true. I still like him and wish him the best. I'm appreciative of the stuff he did in AEW. We spent hundreds and hundreds of hours together and know each other very well. I think we parted on very good terms. Now, of course, Cody Rhodes is the first major name to leave AEW and then sign with WWE. Since its launch, AEW has been an attractive destination for former WWE superstars, but Tony Khan views talent moving between the companies as the natural order for the industry. He said, quote, "It's not anything unusual to see stars coming from other promotions, including WWE, into AEW. I think it's now a little different to see a star from AEW go on to WWE television. I think as the years go by, we're a young promotion. It was bound to happen sooner or later, and now it has." Now, fans have speculated about who could be the next big name to move on from AEW to WWE. One of AEW's top stars, MJF, has publicly discussed his own contract status and future plans. Tony Khan says he expects bidding wars in the future over some of the biggest names in AEW. He said, quote, "We have a lot of great wrestlers here. I expect there probably will be, down the road, interest in some of them because we're putting on such strong shows. I think there's bound to be free agent movement on both sides of the competition. I think it's great for the wrestlers." And look, Tony Khan has said a lot recently on social media, bots, all that kind of stuff. And some of it you have to take with a pinch of salt. Not everything Tony Khan says is accurate. He's got a different perspective on a lot of things. But I really do think that almost people have to cast their mind back and look at history to realize that talent's going from WWE to AEW and now from AEW to WWE. That's just a given. Like, it's always going to happen. Like, the people jumping from WWE to AEW felt very one-sided because, as Tony Khan mentions, they're a young company. But contracts are contracts, and come the end of their 3 years or 5 years in AEW, there aren't going to be names that go back and forth because we have this sort of generation of fan now, and I'm not trying to paint everyone with the same brush here, but we have this generation of fan now that have only ever known really only WWE being around. Yeah, you had like TNA and Ring of Honor and all that kind of stuff, but in terms of a legitimate Number two, competition with a lot of money. I mean, that's the difference. I mean, I know TNA was owned by Panda Energy and they were billionaires, but certainly money, they were willing to invest in the product and big exposure. I know they were on Spike, but this competition that they have with being on TBS and TNT, etc. There's a generation of fan that just hasn't experienced that. And you go back to WWE. Not even in the late 90s in the Monday Night Wars, but in the early 90s or in the late 80s, like pretty much every talent that was either in WWE or WCW at the time had been in either company. It was a very rarefied few that hadn't. Even The Undertaker started off in WCW. You had people like Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. Of course, they went both ways. They started off in WCW as well. Even Ric Flair, like the most famous WCW guy ever, was in WWE for a period of time. It happens. Like, that's the point. Dusty Rhodes, he was the guy, WCW, Jim Crockett Promotions. He was in WWE as well. People go back and forth, and that's what's going to happen now. And it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing for the wrestlers because there's places they can make money. There's places they can get leverage so that they can make sure that the company, if they really desperately want to keep them, they pay them enough money to keep them. And we are going to see bidding wars. We are going to see people from AEW go to WWE. And I'm sure a big deal will be made of it. There's a big deal being made of it now because Cody's the first and because, of course, he's so high profile. It's not just he's the first, but he was an EVP. But it will happen. Like, it will happen when Dusty Rhodes went to WWE in the 90s. Previously, he was the booker of WCW, right? So again, it will happen. And this idea that Cody's going to WWE, it's the end of AEW and all that kind of stuff. No, like, there will be other names that go from AEW to WWE, and there'll be other names that go from WWE to AEW. Daniel Bryan is a great example. It wasn't a case of Daniel Bryan. Daniel Bryan didn't get released. WWE wanted to keep Bryan Danielson. He said no, he fancied going to AEW. Like, that will be what happens, and people made a big deal out of that. But there will be other names that go back and forth because that's how pro wrestling has always worked. And I think just because we've had 20 odd years of it not really working like that, people kind of forget. Like, that is pro wrestling. There are companies filled, or certainly again in the 80s and in the 90s, there were companies filled with guys that had been in either promotion, either territory, and it will be the same in this era that we're in right now. It just will. So people will always make a big deal out of it, and again, people can say like, there's all of these former WWE stars in AEW. That's because for the last 20 years, it's only been WWE. So of course they've been there. And eventually you'll get to a point where in WWE there'll be loads of guys that have been in AEW and vice versa, because again, that's how pro wrestling works. How many guys are currently on the WWE roster that were in Ring of Honor or in Impact Wrestling? But you don't hear the same narrative of, WWE just filling up with ex-Ring of Honor guys or ex-Impact Wrestling guys. That's pro wrestling. You go in different territories. That's how it works. Now, speaking of Ring of Honor, Tony Khan spoke about where it could live in the future in this same interview. He said, quote, "I do own Ring of Honor as a separate entity from AEW, but I also have a TV contract with Warner that I'm going to produce wrestling shows for them. I've been having these conversations with Warner because I think it would make sense for everyone, and I think they're open to it. But in the short timeline we had, what I asked for was basically an exemption for it being an outside portfolio." Now, Tony Khan says Warner Media allowed him to go on with plans for Ring of Honor Supercard of Honor the prior week. The show and several matches for the card were being promoted before Khan's purchase of Ring of Honor was announced. He said, quote, "I've been having more conversations with Warner Media about what we can do together to grow Ring of Honor. I think it would make sense for Ring of Honor to continue as a weekly series and major events like we just had with Supercard. I think the success of Supercard critically and commercially will bode very well for Warner Media really taking an interest in Ring of Honor as well as AEW. I think there's great potential to have a complementary wrestling brand. I didn't want to comment on when fans may see another Ring of Honor pay-per-view, whatever form Ring of Honor takes in the future. Khan appears to be determined to keep the spirit of the company alive. He said that was his goal while producing Supercard of Honor. He said, quote, "I really tried to make it a Ring of Honor show with the Ring of Honor announce team using a lot of people that have been recently wrestling for Ring of Honor and then having some faces of the past, some great legends of Ring of Honor either appearing on video or in person as a surprise like the Young Bucks or Samoa Joe returning to Ring of Honor and signing with AEW that night. I did utilize some resources from AEW with permission from Warner, with the understanding from them that I was not going to make this an AEW show, it would be a Ring of Honor show. I was asking them to utilize some AEW resources to make this a great pay-per-view event. For Ring of Honor, it turned out to be one of the most successful events in their history." So I think the end goal is that Ring of Honor will have some kind of home in the Warner Media umbrella. What that is, where that is, I don't know. Whether that replaces Rampage on Friday, whether it becomes a 2-hour show somewhere else, whether it becomes a 2-hour show maybe on HBO Max, who knows? But I think that's the hope, that's the goal. And I think, as Tony Khan mentioned, I think he hoped and was hoping to basically use Supercard of Honor in the same way that I guess All In was kind of a bit of a pilot, even though it wasn't produced by Tony Khan, it was produced by Ring of Honor. But I think he's kind of hoping that Warner Media had their eyes open, and I'm sure they did. The Supercard of Honor going, okay, that's what that show can be, and we got a place to find it. So I think ultimately it's probably going to live under the Warner Media umbrella somewhere. Now, I do want to talk about this because Braun Strowman, Adam Scherr, whatever you want to call him, he says a lot on social media, and it's wild, to the point of, like, someone said yesterday, like, a complimentary thing about about CYN, and he just went back at them and he was like, wait, that was a compliment, what's going on? Now, he has claimed that AEW president Tony Khan, quote, pays the dirt sheets and blackballs his wrestlers from Control Your Narrative shows. As can be seen on social media, Strowman called out Khan while responding to a post from a fan on Instagram. The fan in question was responding to Khan's claims that an independent study had shown that most of the staunch anti-AEW community online was not real. Strowman wrote, quote, why is there no facepalm emoji? This is the same guy that pays the dirt sheets and says his wrestlers are free to do whatever, but blackballed them from CYN shows. Why? Because we're an effing threat. Through another tweet, Strowman hit back at the notion that his CYN promotion is considered, quote, wrestling's blacklist. He said, quote, blacklisted, that's why so many people want to work with us. Both our shows have had tons of AEW talent backstage watching. We are the new option. You've been warned. Now, it's crazy what he's saying. There is like this weird thing that came out a while ago that Tony Khan was paying wrestling writers like Dave Meltzer, Brian Alvarez, David Bixenspan, which is just, it's not the case. Yeah, I totally agree that people like Dave Meltzer and Brian Alvarez are very biased towards AEW, and I do think that somewhat harms their credibility as an independent, objective wrestling journalist, because I do think they look at things that happen in AEW, and if they happened in WWE, they'd have very much different opinions. But that's because they have personal relationships with Tony Khan. It's not through pay, it's through, personal relationships. Dave Meltzer crows about it. Tony Khan grew up reading The Observer. That's how he books AEW. So Dave Meltzer feels like this is his version of book, all this kind of stuff. It's just because they're friends with him. He doesn't pay them or anything like that. As far as, blackballing AEW wrestlers from CYN, there is a certain stigma around those CYN shows at the moment, and I think just AEW are probably a bit like, we probably don't want to, appear on them. Also, as well, doesn't CYN meant to be having TV, whatever that's worth? And I'm sure AEW contracts prevent people from appearing on TV on other promotions unless it's, accepted or whatever that may be, or they get dispensation, or they get it in their contract. So, yeah, Braun Strowman just says some wild stuff, but I just think it's crazy. I really do. Speaking of Dynamite this week as well, a big match has been announced that will see the Ring of Honor World Television Championship on the line as Minoru Suzuki faces Samoa Joe. Now, I really do think we could see a title change here, which would be quite surprising because you'll say, well, didn't Minoru Suzuki just win the TV Championship at Supercard of Honor? And he did. He defeated Rhett Titus at Supercard of Honor. But if you watch the video I did right after that, I said it felt odd because it did, for me, Minoru Suzuki, I'm a huge Minoru Suzuki fan. Who isn't, right? But I felt that it was a bit odd because the TV champion, that seems a bit strange, and I felt like what they wanted to do was give Suzuki his first major American championship, and they've done that. But is he going to be a fixture of Ring of Honor going forward, wherever it lives, whenever it does really start to do week-to-week stuff? No, but we know Samoa Joe is, and we know that there's this basically Ring of Honor storyline going on right now with Joe, Jay Lethal, and Sanjay Dutt. So I think we could see a title change here And that's how you keep the television championship on weekly television via AEW, and then that springboards into maybe bringing Jonathan Gresham into AEW on a permanent basis, and it pushes things and keeps things ticking over, shall we say, until Ring of Honor actually does debut. So I think that's really where we're going with that one. So wouldn't be shocked if we saw a title change on Wednesday night. But anyway, guys, let me know your thoughts on today's AEW news stories in the comment section below. Be sure to like and subscribe to Wrestling News 365, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.